Welcome back. Well, we just recapped all 7 NSIC games from Saturday in highlight form, and now to break them down a little more, I'm joined by our Midwest traveler and Northern Sun guru, David Brown. So, David, I mean, we're already in the final week of regular season play. Lots of senior days went on last week. And
many more this week.
And many more this week. So emotional wins with that, but what was the most impressive win of this past week, do you think?
Well, in the past couple of weeks, I've called it an impressive win. I'll just say it's the biggest win, and it's Sioux Falls over Upper Iowa, because I don't even think the most ardent of Cougars fans will say that the win over Upper Iowa was impressive by any standard, but they did get the job done. They had a couple of bad turnovers, 3 turnovers in all, bad interceptions. The only offensive touchdown came in the fourth quarter, but as usual, the defense got the job done, kept USF from suffering what wouldn't have really been an upset per se, but it would have been a bad loss, all things considered. Upper Iowa was a decent team, but they just hadn't really shown an ability to play against ranked competition. This was a 7-7 game at halftime, Kelly, but the Cougar defense kept the pressure up, didn't allow the Peacocks to score in the second half, and got just enough from their offense to win. Honestly, Stewart Vandenhavel's become one of the biggest assets in the past few weeks, a reliable field goal kicker that has range from 50 yards, one of the few special teamers in the league you can consistently rely on. He had a couple key field goals. They got this pick 6 from Kyle Campiati in the first half. The offense struggled against a mediocre, from a numbers perspective, standard from the Upper Iowa defense. And USF's definitely going to need to pick things up this upcoming weekend because they do play Minnesota State.
Yes.
But for now, Sioux Falls got the win. They're 9-1. They have a goal in front of them of making the playoffs and possibly hosting a first-round game. They have to treat this game against Minnesota State this weekend like a playoff game.
Yeah, 1 week left, but definitely have to take care of business. Well, looking at this past week, who would be the MVP in your book?
Well, the MVP for the second straight week is the University of Minnesota Duluth defense. Now, technically, their shutout streak is over because Minnesota Crookston did score 6 points against them this weekend. But they came on a fumble return, so technically the defense still has a shutout streak intact. They haven't allowed an offensive point, Kelly, since October 7th. Wow. Today is November 7th. 1 month and a span of 17 straight quarters. Minnesota Duluth has tightened up and shown a resiliency unlike anything I've ever seen. They lost their first 2 home games of the season. Granted, they were to good teams in Minnesota State and Sioux Falls, but they bounced back from 1-2. They've won 7 games in a row, and they've kept themselves in playoff contention, which is pretty remarkable. It's going to be tough to crack that top 7 of Super Region 4. They moved up to 8 in the region rankings, just on the outskirts, but they're going to need a lot of things to go their way if they want to move up to 7. If that doesn't happen, however, they're still going to likely get that invitation to the Mineral Water Bowl, and they're going to have another game to look forward to. And that's honestly a positive that the Bulldogs can take in the 2018, regardless of if they make the playoffs or not. Coming back from 1-2, especially losing those 2 games at home where they had been practically unlosable. I don't even know if that's a word. I can't even think of the right word for it. But yeah, they hadn't lost at home to a conference opponent in nearly 4 years. They lose their first 2 conference games at home. They come back from that 1-2 mark. They're 8-2 right now. Probably will be 9-2 facing UMary this weekend. So a great bounce back for UMD. Will they get into the playoffs? That's going to be a little bit tough, but they should get at least 1 more game with a win on Saturday.
Yeah, it's tough because watching them now, they look like a playoff team for sure.
And the roster and sort of the standard that we're used to from a UMD squad.
Well, exactly. But you look at the teams that won't be making playoffs, and is there a game between non-playoff teams, I guess you could say, that you're kind of intrigued by?
Yeah, I am, and obviously there's a lot of non-playoff teams in the NSIC, but the game I'm looking forward to between those non-playoff teams this weekend is Bemidji State at MSU Moorhead. Now, for Bemidji State, they're 7-3. They're honestly going to look back at this season as one of missed opportunities. They had a heartbreaker back in Week 3 in overtime at Augustana, and then the snow game came a couple of weeks ago where they managed just 50 yards of total offense against Minnesota Duluth. Can they finish with back-to-back 8+ win seasons for the first time since 1999 and 2000? That's going to be the question, and provide a blueprint for 2018 of how to eliminate the little mistakes that could cost you during the season. And it's going to be the last game for quarterback Jordan Hine, who's been one of the NSIC's best over the past 4 years. How will he go out in his final collegiate contest? And then on the other side for MSU Moorhead, a season of ups and downs finally comes to a conclusion. Jacob Sinani has looked good in these past 3 games, getting the start at quarterback, but those games were against Minnesota Crookston, UMary, and Minot State. This is going to be his first test against an upper-tier defense and an above 500 team. The Dragons honestly need to know if they can go into the offseason trusting Sinani with the offense. He's a true freshman. He's shown off both his running and his passing ability. how he performs in this game against Bemidji State, it may go a long way for how MSUM approaches this offseason. The Dragons obviously had high expectations coming in. Everyone was on a high after that big win over Augustana week 1, but it's just been downhill ever since then. They've gone back up with the play of Sinani in recent weeks, so how he performs in this final game will give an indication of how the Dragons can approach 2018 and beyond.
Exactly. Take the momentum going into the next year. So that's a game with non-playoff potential, but there's obviously a huge game with playoff potential. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. Let's hear about that.
Yeah, obviously the big game that everyone's looking forward to in the conference this weekend is Minnesota State at Sioux Falls, 10-0 Mavericks against the 9-1 Cougars. And if we're being completely honest, this is kind of a must-win for both teams in terms of their respective goals. Minnesota State wants to not only finish the regular season undefeated, but hold on to that top region ranking. That's right, they finally moved up to number 1 in Super Region 4 to match being number 1 in the Division II coaches poll. That would mean a first-round bye and home field advantage throughout the playoffs until the championship game, which is held in Kansas City. The Mavericks are definitely in the playoffs, no question about it, regardless of if they win or lose on Saturday. But on a team with national championship aspirations, they know they can't afford to simply be content where they're at. I have no doubt they're going to be the same team they've always been all season long, just simply pointing out the stakes for the Mavericks on Saturday. Now for Sioux Falls, things are, I would say, a bit more tenuous. Assuming Minnesota Duluth beats UMary on Saturday, the Bulldogs are going to finish 9-2. Should USF lose to Minnesota State on Saturday, the Cougars are also going to be 9-2. Sioux Falls would have, in theory, the tiebreaker over Minnesota Duluth because they won the head-to-head matchup against the Bulldogs back in week 1. But we've seen stranger things happen in terms of selection committees and their criteria. Plus, right now is the 5th team in the region, which is what Sioux Falls is. Not a whole lot of room for error in a 7-team field. Sioux Falls is hopeful that guy Max Mickey is going to be able to come back. This is sort of the week that him and the doctors have been targeting as his return. My guess is there's not going to be any sort of formal announcement. There's gamesmanship.
Oh, yeah.
Sioux Falls doesn't want to let Minnesota State know if Max Mickey's coming back. The 3 backs behind him, Maxwell and Townsend Miles, have done an admirable job filling in for him. But if you add Mickey back to that group, that's going to present an elite rush attack against a Minnesota State defense that's one of the best not only in the NSIC but the country as well. All things considered, both the Mavs and the Cougars have to treat this like a playoff game, even though it is technically the final week of the regular season.
A lot on the line.
A lot on the line.
Looking forward to it. Great stuff as always. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, the Coyote football team suffered a tough loss in Cedar Falls over the weekend. Jay Elson sits in with head coach Bob Nielsen to hear what to take from Saturday's game. That's next on Midco Sports Tonight.